They said the body was found before sunrise. Not floating, not buried, just placed, face down in the mud behind the old courthouse, where rainwater gathered and nothing ever dried. The sheriff's boots were already soaked when he arrived. He stood there longer than necessary, staring at the corpse like it might speak if he waited long enough. It didn't, but someone else would have known what it meant. Someone whose name never appeared in the paper. Because in that town, in the year 1838, there was a man who solved crimes without being allowed to exist. And when he disappeared, the town began to rot from the inside out. The newspapers ran the story the next day. Unidentified Negro male found deceased. No name, no history, no questions. But the sheriff knew better. He always did. Because for 7 years, every murder, every missing child, every strange death that didn't make sense had been quietly handed to one man. A man owned, not hired. A mind used, not acknowledged. A slave who could see patterns where others saw noise. Who listened where others spoke. Who remembered everything. And now he was gone. By the end of that week, 3 more people would vanish. By the end of that month, the church would lock its basement forever. And by winter, the town would begin pretending it had always been this way. But the records remain. Scraps of letters. Ledger marks with no explanation. Sermons that suddenly changed tone. And one repeated phrase, written by 3 different hands over 30 years. Do not speak his name. Tonight, we open the file they tried to erase. The town sat at the edge of a river that never fully froze. People said that was a blessing. It meant trade could continue through winter. It meant wagons came and went. But old settlers whispered another reason. They said the water moved too fast for bodies to stay. The town had a church before it had a school, a gallows before it had a jail, and a sheriff before it had paved roads. Everything important was built early. Everything human came later. By 1831, the population hovered just under 800. Farmers, mill workers, clergy, a handful of families who had arrived first and never left. And beneath all of it, slavery functioned quietly. Not in chains in the street, not in markets, but in kitchens, barns, back rooms, and in the sheriff's office. That's where he worked. Not officially, not on paper. He cleaned the floors, sorted files, carried messages. And when something went wrong, when a body turned up wrong, or a witness lied too cleanly, or a child vanished without a sound, the sheriff would close the door and slide the problem across the desk. No one knew where the man learned to read. No one knew who taught him to think like that. But they trusted him more than they trusted God. And that terrified them. Because knowledge, in a town like this, was a dangerous thing to give the wrong person. There is no birth certificate, no sale receipt, no church baptism. The only proof he existed appears in margins. A grocery ledger with notes written twice, once by the shop owner, once corrected in neater handwriting. A jail log where causes of death suddenly become specific. A sermon outline rewritten the night before delivery. The handwriting never matches the name attached. Because there is never a name. Just phrases like, the boy from the sheriff's house. The quiet one. Him. Witnesses later described him the same way. Thin. Always listening. Eyes too steady. He asked questions that made people uncomfortable, but never raised his voice. Never accused. Just waited. And people filled the silence for him. That was his gift. He noticed patterns others dismissed. That fires broke out only on Sundays. That missing girls were always last seen near the same stretch of woods. That men who confessed too quickly often shared the same church pew. He brought these things to the sheriff in private. The sheriff took the credit in public. And the town slept better because of it. Until the day the man stopped coming to work. The final case involved a child. A girl from the orphan home run by the church. 8 years old. Quiet. Known for sleepwalking. She was gone by morning. No footprints. No struggle. Just an empty bed and a window opened from the inside. The sheriff did what he always did. He waited until night. Then sent for the man. But the man didn't come. Instead, the sheriff found something waiting on his desk. A folded paper. Carefully placed. Inside were symbols. Old ones. Drawn in charcoal and ash. Marks the sheriff had seen once before. In the basement of the church, years earlier, during a fire that had been officially labeled accidental. At the bottom of the page, a sentence. They are using the children. That was the last written trace of him. By dawn, his quarters behind the courthouse were empty. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just the smell of damp earth. and the river running fast. The church bell rang the morning after his disappearance. Not for prayer, not for mourning. It rang early, too early. People said later it was just habit, that the pastor liked to keep routines steady in troubled times. But routines are how you hide panic. The church sat on a small rise overlooking the town, its stone foundation darker than the walls above it. No one remembered who laid those stones. They were already there when the church was built, like the land had been waiting. The orphan home was attached to the rear of the building. That part never made it into postcards. Children slept there, ate there, prayed there, and sometimes disappeared. The pastor told the sheriff the girl must have wandered off. She sleepwalks, he said calmly. Children do strange things. The sheriff didn't argue, but he noticed something. The pastor never asked who had been investigating the case. He already knew. The basement door stayed locked year-round, even in summer, even during floods. Official reason, storage. Unofficial reason, no one asked twice. Years earlier, a fire had broken out below the church during renovations. It burned hot and fast, then died on its own. When townspeople rushed in, they found blackened walls, but no ashes. Just markings, scratched into stone. The same shapes now sitting on the sheriff's desk. After the fire, the basement door was sealed. A new lock installed. And sermons changed. They became longer, darker, focused on obedience, on silence, on the danger of knowing too much. The slave, though no one called him that to his face, had been the only one who asked to see the basement, and the only one who was denied. He understood the town in ways others couldn't, because he lived outside it. He heard confessions people thought were prayers. He overheard deals made behind smiles. He saw who panicked when certain names were mentioned. Most of all, he noticed how often children were blamed for their own disappearance. Ran away, fell in the river, taken by animals, but never taken by people. He kept notes in his head, because paper could be found. And when the orphan girl vanished, something clicked. A pattern too old to ignore. The symbols on the paper were older than the town. They weren't religious. They weren't tribal. They were functional. Marks used to divide, to select, to erase. He had seen them once before, carved into the underside of a wagon abandoned near the river. Inside were children's shoes, all different sizes, all worn. The sheriff had ordered the wagon burned. No report filed, but the man remembered the symbols. And now they were back, in the church, in the orphan home, and written by someone who wanted the sheriff to finally see them. The sheriff did nothing, not because he didn't believe it, but because he did. He had been young when the fire happened, young enough to be told not to ask questions, old enough to understand fear when he felt it again. So he stayed quiet, and the town followed his lead. No search parties, no sermons about the missing girl, just quiet adjustments. Windows locked tighter, children kept closer, and whispers about the man who used to help the sheriff. Probably ran, people said. Probably stole something. They needed to believe that, because the alternative meant he had seen something no one was meant to see. 2 weeks later, the river swelled. Logs came loose upstream. Debris piled against the banks. But no bodies surfaced. The sheriff stood on the bridge one night, staring into the water. He imagined the man standing beside him, silent, waiting, the way he always did. And for the first time, the sheriff wondered if the man had left willingly, or if the town had finally decided it didn't need him anymore. The first person to break wasn't important. That's why it worked. An old woman who washed linens for the church. She drank too much. She talked too freely. People dismissed her. But grief makes people careless. She told a story no one wanted to hear. That the night the orphan girl vanished, the basement door had been open. Just a crack. Enough for sound to leak out. She said she heard singing. Not children's songs. Not hymns. Something slower. Measured. Like counting. She quit the next morning. Packed her things. Left town before sunset. By winter, she was dead in another county. The paper said exposure. No details. The sheriff waited until Sunday, while everyone was upstairs, praying. He took the keys from the wall behind the pulpit, hands shaking. The basement smelled like wet stone and old iron. The walls were covered. Not symbols this time. Names. Scratched in layers. Some deep, some rushed. Children's names. Dates. And beside many of them, a single vertical line. Tallies. At the far end of the room stood a table. Clean. Too clean. And beneath it, a trapdoor. The sheriff did not open it, because he already knew. The orphan home was never meant to save children. It was meant to collect them, those without families, without records, without people who would ask questions, children who could disappear quietly. The church didn't sell them, didn't traffic them. It used them for labor, for rituals dressed up as discipline, for experiments in obedience, and sometimes for something worse, something the sheriff didn't yet have words for. But the man did. That's why he was dangerous. The sheriff hadn't chosen the man by accident. Years ago, after the fire, bodies had turned up wrong. No wounds, no struggle, just empty, like something had been taken from them. The man had looked at those bodies longer than anyone else. And then he said, they were made to give something. The sheriff laughed then, but he remembered it now. The town needed someone smart enough to clean up its messes, but not powerful enough to expose them. A mind in chains, until the chains stopped working. 3 nights after the sheriff entered the basement, the trapdoor was found open. No one admitted to opening it. Inside was nothing human, just soil, freshly turned, and something wrapped in cloth. The sheriff knew the fabric. It had come from the courthouse, from the man's quarters, folded carefully, respectfully, like an offering returned. Rumors spread fast once silence failed. People accused neighbors. Church members accused clergy. Families locked their doors. The oldest families closed ranks. They said outsiders were stirring trouble. They said the town was cursed because someone had spoken too much. And quietly, they blamed the man. Said he had misunderstood. Said he had imagined things. Said he had gone mad. Dead men are easy to accuse. The sheriff began drinking, talking to no one. Then one night, he wrote a letter. Not to the state, not to the church, to himself. He wrote that the man had been right, that the town had fed on silence for too long, that something old had learned how to wear religion. He never sent the letter. He buried it under the courthouse floor, where it would be found decades later. The orphan girl was never found. But years later, during renovations, bones were uncovered beneath the church. Small, carefully arranged, with symbols carved into them. The report said animal remains. The town accepted that, because by then, accepting anything else meant admitting what they had always known. After his disappearance, crime stopped being solved. Wrong men were hanged. Murders went cold. The town became louder, more violent, because the quiet observer was gone. And sometimes, late at night, people swore they saw someone standing near the river, watching, waiting. In the 1930s, a historian requested old courthouse files. Most were missing, but one margin note remained, written in careful handwriting. No name attached, just a sentence. Truth survives even when we erase the people who carried it. And beneath it, a symbol scratched deep, the same one that started everything. Time passed the way it always does in places like this. Slow on the surface, rotten underneath. By the 1870s, the town had a rail stop. By the 1890s, electric lights. By the 1910s, new families who didn't know what questions not to ask. But the church was untouched. Same stones, same basement door, always locked. The orphan home closed quietly in 1884. No ceremony, no explanation. Children were relocated. Records never followed. People said the town had moved on. But older residents flinched when the basement was mentioned, and no one swam in the river anymore. In 1906, a schoolteacher noticed something strange. 3 students, unrelated, began describing the same dream. A dark room, stone walls, scratching sounds, and a man standing in the corner. Not threatening, not speaking, just watching. They said he looked sad, and angry, and tired. The teacher reported it. The school board told her to stop asking questions. She left town within the year. In 1919, a flood damaged the church foundation. Workers were sent below to assess the stonework. One of them refused to go back down. He said the walls were warm. Another quit after seeing the names, scratched deeper than before. More recent, the church board sealed the basement permanently. Concrete this time. No door, no access. They told the town it was for safety. In 1932, during courthouse renovations, workers found a sealed envelope under the floor. The sheriff's letter, yellowed, shaking handwriting. It named nothing directly, but it confessed everything. That justice had been borrowed. That silence had been paid for with lives. That the man who solved crimes had been sacrificed to protect a system too afraid to stop itself. The letter vanished before it could be archived. But one clerk copied a sentence before it disappeared. We used him until knowing became dangerous. By the 1940s, the man existed only as rumor. A ghost. A warning. Parents told children not to linger near the river. Not because it was dangerous, but because someone was still watching. People said if you lied too easily, he would notice. If you hurt someone quietly, he would remember. A conscience the town had tried to kill. In 1947, a church trustee was found dead near the old basement wall. No wounds. No struggle. Just empty. Doctors called it a heart failure. But one detail never made the report. His fingernails were broken, as if he had been scratching stone. The town never faced what it did. It renamed streets, renovated buildings, rewrote records. But trauma doesn't vanish. It waits. And it teaches. The man had learned the truth too well. And in disappearing, he forced the town to carry it instead. During a 1951 survey, a worker found a symbol carved into the river bridge. Fresh. The same one from the first case. No one claimed responsibility. The bridge was repainted. The symbol bled through. The town didn't just lose a man. It lost its ability to lie cleanly. After he was gone, everything became louder. Messier. Because no one was left to absorb the truth quietly. Some stories don't end. They wait for someone willing to listen. And this one waited a long time. In 1954, a graduate student researching rural crime patterns requested microfilm copies of old newspapers. Most editions were missing pages, ink smeared, columns cut short. But one issue remained intact, dated 3 days after the man vanished. It contained a single sentence buried near the bottom. The sheriff reports all matters resolved. No names, no follow-up, just closure where none existed. The student wrote a note in the margin. Resolved for whom? The town didn't erase his name out of cruelty. They erased it out of fear. Because names make people real. And real people can accuse. As long as he was unnamed, he could be rewritten. A helper. A servant. A rumor. Never a witness. Never a judge. Never a man who understood too much. For years, the town had leaned on his mind. Let him see what they refused to face. Let him carry what they didn't want to hold. And when he finally spoke the truth plainly, they removed the problem. Not the crime. Not the system. The mirror. The man didn't vanish the night he left. He vanished long before. When his conclusions were taken without credit. When his warnings were ignored. When his humanity was treated as a tool. The river didn't erase him. The town did. The church stands because it adapted. Not because it repented. It learned how to bury better. How to rename. How to wait. Institutions survive by shedding individuals. Especially the ones who see clearly. Looking back, historians notice something chilling. Every major change in the town followed a disappearance. A closure. A renovation. A rewriting. Progress built on silence. The man had noticed that too. That's why he had to go. By the 1960s, the town was unremarkable. Safe on paper. Forgettable. And that was the goal. No one looks for secrets in places that seem ordinary. But some things don't fade. Basements settle. Rivers shift. Walls remember pressure. And sometimes, people feel watched without knowing why. The man never wrote a confession. Never left a diary. Because he understood something the town never did. Truth doesn't need witnesses forever. Just long enough. This is not a ghost story. No haunting. No revenge. Just a record of what happens when a system feeds on someone until they become dangerous. And then pretends they never existed. Somewhere in the archives, between missing pages and unnamed bodies, his work still holds. Solving crimes. Even now. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone brave enough to look where they told you not to.